There are days when I am just tired. Tired of trying, tired of making an effort, tired of reaching yet and yet again for solutions that don't seem to pan out or circumstances that don't seem to change. But I am often reminded that it is possible that the very thing that God has for me requires a continued effort, and it requires that I keep reaching. When I'm tempted to give up, I remember the lives of those close to me, my mother, my grandmothers, and many of my friends who have experienced the glory of God shining brightest in their life in the darkest of times. I have seen that it was in the midst of their choice to continue to hope in God that God showed up and moved in their circumstances. I have learned that it is crucial to pursue God even when I feel unsure of the outcome. I have seen many times when we persevere through hopeless situations and choose to put our hope in Him, that we see Him move in an unbelievable way in our hearts and in our lives. God can be trusted. He is worth pursuing. Recently, I spent a few days in the hospital with my youngest son. He fell from a monkey bar and broke his arm, and we ended up in there for a few days so he could have surgery and then rest a while they made sure that everything was beginning to heal up fine. One of those nights, he asked me to join him in his hospital bed. He woke up with a nightmare and figured that if I could join him in the bed, that would calm his nerves and totally set him at ease. I had no problem with doing that, except for one thing. There was no room in the bed for me. So I asked him to scoot over. I said, look, if you want me to get in the bed with you, I have no problem with that, but you've got to make room for me. And since he was desperate, he did. Basically, what I was telling him is that in order for him to get what he wanted, he was going to have to do something. He was going to have to scoot over so I could get in. And it made me think a little bit about the woman with the issue of blood. In Luke chapter 8, we find a woman who had to do something. And I think that we can learn a lot from her by taking a look at who she was, where she was coming from, what was going on in her life, and what she did. We find in Luke chapter 8 that this woman had a problem, kind of like my son had a problem with his nightmare. She was bleeding and had been bleeding for 12 long years. That's a long time. That's a long time to be sick. That's a long time to be tired. That's a long time not to feel good. And it is certainly a long time not to have a solution to your problem. Not only that, but she tried to find a solution. She'd been to all the doctors. She'd spent all the money that she had. And she was just out of options. You know, she also was affected internally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually by her situation because it'd been a long time. She'd run out of options. She'd spent all the money that she had. And because she was bleeding, based on Leviticus 15, we know that she was considered unclean for 12 years. That meant she wasn't supposed to be around people. She wasn't supposed to be in the temple. She wasn't supposed to go to the tabernacle, and she certainly wasn't supposed to touch anyone. So we've got a woman with issues, and I don't know about you, but I have my own set of issues. Some of them I've had for a long time. Some of them I've struggled with recently. Sometimes I've sought solutions and haven't been able to find them. Some of them have involved finances. Some of those have involved my emotions, my spiritual life, or my physical life. And there have been times where I felt just like my son did, man, I've got a problem. And I would love, God, for you to help me solve it. I would love for you to fix it. I would love for you to come near and help me in the situation that I'm in. So I'd love to look at this woman and look at 3 things that she did, 3 things I think you and I can learn from that will help us when we find ourselves with a problem or ourselves with a situation that we can't quite seem to solve on our own. The first thing is she was very persistent, extremely persistent. If you're going to work at solving a problem for 12 years, I mean, that's kind of a character trait, you know? It's not like you tried once and failed and you gave up. She kept trying. So before she ever meets Jesus, we know something about her. She was a woman who had decided she wasn't going to give up, period. She wasn't going to quit trying at all. She was going to assume that there was a solution available to her until she had tried everything she could. And that's what we know about her where we meet her. She was a persistent woman with a problem. But persistence can get you so far, but only so far. She was persistent in the natural, but what got her healing was her persistence in the supernatural. She was willing to do what she could with what she had. But when she heard that Jesus was nearby, when she heard that he was crossing the lake in Luke chapter 8, where honestly he had come from healing somebody else and probably the word of healing had gotten to her, when she heard that there was another solution that involved Jesus, that involved some supernatural situation, she used that same persistence in that scenario. She found her way through a thick crowd, through a group of people, throngs of people who were trying to make their way to Jesus, to hear him, to learn of him, and yes, also to get healing. She crawls on the ground and reaches out to touch the hem of his garment, thinking that if I can just get close enough to get a little bit of his healing power, that should make me whole. And she was healed. And she sneaks back out of the crowd, unseen, unnoticed, she thought. Jesus turns around and says, "Who touched me?" This woman used the persistence that she had in the natural realm, in the supernatural realm, to access Jesus and the solution that she hoped that he could give to her problem. He gives it to her, and then she's willing to sneak away, and he doesn't want to let her. Let me pause for just a second and bring your attention to something else. She used her persistence in a natural way and a supernatural way. And here's why I think this is such an important point. I know people, sometimes it's been me, where I'm willing to do everything I can on my own, independently of God, to try to find a solution to my problem. And then when it comes to seeking God over that same issue, I have to admit that maybe sometimes I don't do it with the same gusto, that I don't attack my prayer life and my study of the word and learning and getting as much as I can from hearing other people teach me God's word. I don't attack the God solution the same way that I attack my own solution. But I also know that there are people that I've met, and sometimes I've been one of those too, where I'm seeking God so wholeheartedly, and what is available for me to do, what he's put right in front of me, I won't do. Too spiritual to be any earthly good, or too earthly focused to have any spiritual impact. We can be guilty of both. What I love about the story of this woman is she did both. She was willing to do what she could, and she was willing to reach for Jesus to do what only he could do. He did heal her. And what did it involve for her to go creeping and crawling on the floor, on the ground, to reach for Jesus? She had to persist in the natural, in the supernatural, and one more thing. She had to persist past herself. Because there's no way after 12 years, 12 long years of being disappointed, being frustrated because the solutions that you hope for aren't panning out, being filled with lack of hope, where your hope has been displaced with emptiness and sorrow because what you thought would work this time didn't work again. Sometimes we talk ourselves out of continuing to try. This woman had been used to being lonely. She was used to being unseen. She was used to people trying to stay away from her because she wasn't supposed to be around anyone. She was used to feeling bad. She was used to probably feeling sorry for herself. And that's the point, my friend, where many of us drop the ball. Because it's been a long time, and because we've been disappointed, because we've tried and failed, because we've tried again and it still didn't work out, because the people that we placed our hopes in, or the money that we've spent, or the education that we've gotten, or the marriage that we got in, or the children that we had, or the dreams that we put on the back shelf, and we just realize over time we don't see anything changing, we give up. This woman, despite how she had to feel, tired, used to being invisible, and maybe a little hopeless, she kept going, even past her own feelings about her own life. Can I just ask you, have you gotten stuck? Have you gotten stuck because things haven't gone the way that you thought they would or that you wanted them to go? And maybe you just got tired of trying. She kept going. And so when Jesus calls out to her after he realizes that the power went out from him and he says, "Who touched me?" It's interesting to me that after all of that, after her natural persistence and her supernatural persistence and even her personal persistence, that he wanted something more from her. He said, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" And when no one else noticed, because Peter questions the Lord Jesus and says, "Nobody touched you. There's all people around that are touching you. And you're just looking for this one. There's not one." And Jesus said, "Oh yes, there's one. Who touched me?" And he keeps pushing the envelope to force this woman, to make this woman raise her hand and say, "It was me." Why was that important? This woman who had a problem and was persistent, why did Jesus want her to make a proclamation? Because he wanted her to own up to her faith. He wanted her to admit to herself and to others that she had not only gone the 12 years, but that she had reached for Jesus and that he had healed her. What is so interesting in this passage is that it's not until after she proclaims her faith that she says, "I touched Jesus and he healed me." It's not until after that that he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you whole." This woman was looking for healing. She was looking for her blood flow to stop, for the pain to end, for the tiredness to wane. That's all she was looking for. But when she went to Jesus as her solution, Jesus gave her more than what she was looking for. I love the scripture that says in Ephesians 3:20 that he is able to do exceedingly above and beyond anything that we could ask for or even think. This woman wasn't thinking about being whole and having peace and living an undisturbed, unbothered life altogether. She just wanted to stop bleeding. What I love about Jesus, when we take what we can do, our persistence, and pursue him, is that he can give us more than we were even asking for, more than we were even hoping for, more than we even expected. And it's through the proclamation, both to ourselves and to others, in which we are reminded of what he's done in our life. It wasn't enough for this woman to receive healing. God was asking her, Jesus Christ was looking at her and asking her to rehearse what he had done for her. I don't know about you, but when I hear the testimonies of other people and I hear what God has done in their life, it is inspiring for me. It is encouraging for me. One, to know that one other person of faith prayed and asked God to answer, and he did. But it encourages me in my faith that he can do the same for me. And in this chapter, one of the goals that Jesus had was proclamation. He had done it a few verses before with a man who'd had a demon come out of his body. And Jesus told that same man earlier, "Hey, you go and tell everybody what I've done for you." He was doing the same thing for this woman. You don't just get what you need. I want you to rehearse what I did for you so that you remind yourself and that you believe it. But I also want you to rehearse it so that other people are benefited in the process. You know, Revelation 12:11 says that we will overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. This woman overcame because she was able to access the power of Jesus. But the Bible tells us and encourages us to share what God has done in our lives, because that's how we encourage each other. We overcome by the blood of the Lamb what Jesus Christ has already done, but then we encourage each other to continue overcoming when we share what he's done in our lives. What can we learn from this woman? From this woman who had 12 years of an issue of blood? We learn that persistence matters. Persistence to follow after God, to seek Him, to pursue Him, to read our Bibles, to pray, to study, even when we have tried everything else. Your persistence matters. Don't give up. We can learn from this woman with 12 long years of an issue of blood. That persistence matters. But more than that, that pursuing Christ matters more. Romans 12:12 says to be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer. James 1:12 says that blessed is the one who perseveres. It matters that you persevere. It matters that you hang in there, and it matters that you pursue Christ more than anything else. Your dependence on Him matters than your abilities to independently create or give yourself any solution. Why? Because there's always more available when we pursue Jesus. He's interested not just in answering our prayer, but in doing something in us. And that's what we see from this woman, that at the end of the day, not only did God answer her prayer, but He made her whole. He did something in her. Just the other day, I picked up the phone and called a friend. I called her because in my own life, it's just been one thing after another. Sickness is in my family, and then I already told you, my youngest son just last week ended up in the hospital with that broken arm. I called this friend because I've seen her life, and I've seen over time her own family have sicknesses, one behind the other, and nothing like a broken arm. I'm talking about major chronic illness, and not just with one person, multiple people. And I called her because I wanted to know, how did she make it through? In fact, I specifically asked her, have you ever just screamed out loud in the car and kind of been a little frustrated with God about your circumstances? And you know what she told me? She said, absolutely, but I kept pursuing Him. I kept believing that He was doing something in my situation and in me, that while I couldn't see it now, one day I would. And she encouraged me, specifically through her testimony and then even in my own, to stick with it and to believe God despite the difficulty of my circumstances. So can I encourage you not just to receive what God has done in your life, but to share what God has done in your life with someone else? It will encourage you to remember what God has done, and it will encourage the person who's listening to your story to hold on, to persist, and to believe that God is able.